Okay, awesome. Here we go. So it was January 2022. And we had a WeCon committee meeting and we were trying to stimulate attendance and registration. I know, Carlos, you were on the call, a couple of people here were on the call. And we were like, how do we get people to attend WeCon? And then I said, why don't we just do a LinkedIn Live? I was on LinkedIn last week as a guest. It was awesome. Let's do that. That should boost registration. And somebody said, great idea, Mandy. Why don't you roll with it? Right? Famous last words. You come up with the idea and then you have to actually do it. So I didn't know anything about podcasting. I didn't know anything about live streaming. I had been a guest on many podcasts before, but I had never done my own. I didn't know what equipment to use. I didn't know how to do it. I certainly didn't know what buttons to press. And then in walks Amani Roberts.
Yes.
And he raises his hand. He's like, I'll do that with you. That'll be fun. And I thought, oh, the networking side of me is like, well, Amani's the president of MPI Southern California. He's fancy. I'll network with him. That'll be cool. And lo and behold, he's a professional live streamer and a professional DJ.
Yes.
So what we did was once a week in 2022 for 5 weeks, we promoted WeCon registration. So week 1, we talked about general session speakers. Week 2, we talked about the breakout speakers. Week 3, we talked about highlighting certain sponsors. We talked about the philanthropy, the food and beverage. And guess what? It worked. We had record attendance. It stimulated it. And then after that, it was over. We didn't work together anymore. And we said, well, that's a bummer. We kind of liked working together.
Yes.
How do we keep this party going? And so we talked about starting our very own podcast. Now, this is back in 2022. And we thought, what in the world do we want to talk about? So what we said was, Amani's an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. Amani's a professor. He's a music industry professor. He loves business. I love business. I just had come back from a book tour where people would come up to me and they would tell me their grueling business stories. And some of them were triumphs and some of them were awful trips. And I thought, well, let's share that with the audience, right? Like, how selfish of me to keep that to myself. Let's share this with the audience. And that is how Adventures in Business podcast was born.
Yeah.
Now, 2 years later, we have a very, very loyal audience. We had no idea what we were doing at the beginning. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to share with you how to start your own podcast. We're going to share our lessons learned, our trips, our falls, our triumphs, and we're going to share with you what you can do, what you can't do, the equipment you need to use. That's going to be the first part of this. And then the second part of this, we're actually going to interview 3 people live. And it's going to be super short, very quick interviews, but we are live streaming right now. Our personal philosophy is build in public. We believe in making mistakes in public. You are going to see some mistakes today, and that's okay. What we're going to do today is during the live session, we are going to lift up the lid of the saucepan and we're showing you how the sauce is made. So in between each interview, we're not going to stop the cameras. We're going to adjust. You're going to hear us say this worked, this didn't work. You're going to hear us say all of this. And then at the very end, we're going to do a Q&A and we're going to answer all your questions. So how does that sound?
Good.
Okay,
Right.
good. Okay, awesome.
Very good.
Awesome.
All right, so we've explained a little bit about where this will be seen. Once again, it'll be on MPI's LinkedIn page. It'll be on MPI Southern California's Facebook page, and then the Amani Experience X channel. We have the ability to broadcast at many, many places. These are the 3 that we chose. And tune in, make comments. If you have a question, write it down. Also, once we're finished, you can go to our Adventures in Business Spotify account, also our YouTube. It will also live on MPI's page. That's one of the hidden benefits is that if people miss it, many of you have shared that you saw some of our broadcasts leading up to this event and you'll watch it late at night, listen to it while you're driving. It will live on the Facebook page and the LinkedIn page. I like to say that there is beauty in the replay when it comes to podcasting and live streaming. Yes.
Okay. So we're going to get started. We're going to share a bunch of stats with you, but attention is the new oil. Okay. Oil, we have the oil economy, right? It runs our world. But attention is what drives the economy right now. Does anybody know this guy, Scott Galloway? Anybody? Right? He's a professor at NYU. He's an awesome keynote speaker. If you've never seen him before, he makes predictions and forecasts. But he actually has two great podcasts. One is the Prof G podcast, and the other one is Pivot. I hate the word pivot, but the other one is Pivot. And it's a great business podcast. And he's one of the four thinkers of our time about trends and business. And when he talks about attention is the new oil, we are in the attention economy right now. We have to be where people are. And where are people right now? On their phones. Exactly.
Yes.
The power is in your pocket. And the podcasting, whether you are a guest on a podcast, whether you create a podcast, or whether you listen to a podcast, or you may consider advertising, shifting some of your marketing dollars over to a podcast. You want to be where the attention is right now. And would you rather look at a magazine article, or would you rather be with somebody while they're walking their dog, or they're driving their kids, dropping them off at school? Or would you rather be with them when they're doing a sales appointment and you're inspiring them about something? So today we're going to talk about attention. So why do a podcast? Amani,
Yes.
why do a podcast?
There are many, many reasons. I like to say doing a podcast is one of the most intimate forms of networking you can do now. You're one-on-one with a guest. You're talking to them, ask them questions that you might not ask in public, but you can ask in private, sort of on the podcast. And I just think it's kind of the modern day way of networking. It's very effective. You know, there are many of our previous guests that are here and we saw them and it's like we seeing old friends. So it's a really strong way to build a quick relationship. It's like you're giving them access to your platform and your people to share their story, and you're helping them grow their platform, and you're also sharing their stories with your audience. So it's just a really common but a new way of networking.
It's the newest way of networking. And it's a great way to interact. So the next one is thought leadership. So what you have to do right now to be relevant in the marketplace is establish yourself as a thought leader. And being a guest on a podcast, starting your own podcast, or really knowing anything about it is a great step towards establishing thought leadership, because your value as a person, people follow people. They don't follow the brands. You are a vehicle to the brand, right? So your way of establishing thought leadership is, hey, I just saw this really cool excerpt, this podcast. You might share a podcast. You don't have to create one. You have to listen one. You might just share one. And all of a sudden, somebody else may have that in common with you. Now, you do that more and more frequently. You're a thought leader. So we had a funny story about a guest. We had Erin Deal. Does anybody here know who Erin Deal is? We had her on our podcast. And I instantly fell in love with her. I didn't know her at all. I had the craziest lady crush because I was like, she likes teal. I like teal. She loves Oprah. I love Oprah. She's always doing high kicks at weddings and dance routines. I'm always doing high kicks. We fell madly in love. I love Erin Deal. And she was just a guest on our show. And through that quick connection, that accidental networking, that built both of our thought leadership, because Erin wrote a book. She wrote a book called I See You. Now, that book just came out 2 months ago. We had her on our show last year, but I started following her. We started helping each other. We started lifting each other up. We started building a community. So when she was launching her book, she asked me to be on her book launch squad. Okay. If you've never been asked to be on a book launch squad, just say yes. It is fun. It is the funnest thing I've ever done. She gave me the assets to share. I signed her book for her. I gave her all the testimonials. And we had a bunch of people that did that. But through our mutual relationship that started on this podcast, we now refer business to each other. She's helped us with some podcast stuff. I've helped her connect with speaker bureaus, DMOs, different DMCs. So that thought leadership and that networking is tied hand in hand. You never know who you're going to meet and how it's going to go.
Now, when I first introduced you to Erin, I knew that you two were going to fall in. So I set that up, and it worked out perfectly because I had met Erin about 4 years ago, and I said, I know who you would get along with very well. So I got you. Yes.
Thank you, Amani. Kudos to you,
Yes,
Amani.
yes. Now, masterclass, whenever we're interviewing someone, it's like we're attending a masterclass put on by them. They're sharing their subject matter expertise, they're sharing their ups, their downs, what worked in their business, what didn't work in their business, and we just get to talk to them for 45 minutes. It's like a 45-minute masterclass, and it happens every week.
And Amani has a journal. Like the guest will be talking, and he's right. He's like,
Yes.
wait a minute. I'm like, Amani, heads up, bro. He's just writing a journal. He's taking notes. It is a masterclass.
It is a masterclass. Yes.
So next, now this stat, I find this stat to be shattering, right? 135 million Americans, that is 47% of our population. 135 million Americans are reached monthly
Mhm.
through podcasting. What other vehicle do we have that can be reached through anything? TV doesn't do that. Radio doesn't do that. X may do that. Twitter may do that. We may see some of that on YouTube, but 135 million Americans are on podcasts, or they're reached through podcasts, whether they listen to it or whether they're on it. This next one is 93% of podcast listeners will listen to the entire episode. How many times have you been just in a sales meeting or a site inspection and people tune out after 10 minutes, right? How many times have you been interacting and your attendees and they're watching a keynote speaker and half of them are on their phone? Our attention span is not long anymore. So to have a vehicle like this where they listen to 93% of the actual episode is a really huge deal. So if I was in charge of marketing dollars and I wanted to put my money towards something, I would really be thinking about, is it a magazine ad or is it a regional podcast? Is it radio? Is it a billboard? Is it a trade show even? Or is it a podcast? Because how many times have you been watching a commercial? Who watches those anymore? And people fast forward through them, right? What we have seen in podcasting is this is integrated marketing. So, for example, Amani loves these sweater vests, right?
Yes.
He's got like 16.
Yes.
He's got
I have
16 of
videos
these
of it.
last time I counted,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
There is no better sponsor for our show
Yes.
than Macy's, which is where he
Macy's.
buys
If
all
you-
his sweater
Yes.
vests.
If you have a connection at Macy's, come see me, please. Also bow ties, but continue.
The bow ties. So integrated marketing happens through this podcast. Nobody can fast forward through the commercial. Nobody's hitting pause. We're just talking about, oh my gosh, Amani, I love that sweater vest. Where'd you get it from? Macy's. And it's the new product placement. How many movies have you seen
Yes.
where the MacBook, the logo is right there, or somebody's sipping on the Diet Coke? So the integrated marketing through a podcast is the new product placement. It's the new video ad. It's the new billboard. So with the attention that you have here and knowing that almost half of the United States is watching it, it's something to definitely consider.
Now I know. Well, first of all, where were you in like April of 2008? Now, if you were my age, you would be working. If you're younger, you might have been in elementary school. Just think about that. That was when I did my first ever podcast. I'm on my third now. And all I had was a microphone with a USB connection to a computer. Now, when I go back and listen to the sound, it's not good. But I had to get started somehow. So that's the point of showing you this, is that really all you need to get started is a microphone and a computer. You could use your earbuds and talk into the computer. That's also pretty effective via Zoom. That's very, very applicable nowadays. Now, you see on here, the top left, that's an audio interface. And so that's like an audio interface. That's what you would plug in your microphone into, which would then plug into your computer. What's shown there is a Focusrite. It's about $129. You get it, you plug it in, you can go. It allows you to control some of the sound, the levels, really simple, effective. It'll make your sound, it'll elevate your sound. Now, you do not have to videotape your podcast. However, I recommend it for many reasons. First of all, Spotify, when you put on Spotify, they're giving, you know how they play with the algorithms. They're giving yours an extra bump if it's video. And sometimes when you watch a video podcast on Spotify, it actually comes across very nicely. Second, you do have that content that then you can chop up. And many of you will see how they share the stories or on whether it's YouTube Shorts, Instagram Stories, TikTok. You'll see clips from the podcast. So it's very effective for that. And then YouTube. what is the largest search engine in the world? Number one is Google. Do you even know what number two is?
YouTube.
So you get the content on there, someone will find it. So you see the microphone, you see the headphones. I don't have usually have my headphones on when I do this. No headphones. And then you have cameras. So we're fortunate that Corbin is with us. So we have 3 cameras here. Now, you don't have to go out and buy a camera. You look around your house, see what you have. You could have an old DSLR camera that you use to take pictures that you can actually plug into a computer. It can stream for you as long as you have a battery, good battery life. You can use old iPhones or Android phones, smartphones also. So you can, even if you're going to record on Zoom, just record that way, and it comes across pretty nice. So you can do that also. That's it. Then you have your computer, you have your capture card. There's a lot of other stuff there, but I don't want to scare you too much. So we'll just say earbuds, microphone, computer, record. The key is just to get started. That's really the key.
And if you fell asleep during that, like I did, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, for real. Amani knows what equipment, because I didn't know what to do. And he literally sent me the links. He's like, go get these 3 things and you're good. And so ask us that after the fact. Come up to us. We will tell you. I won't tell you any of the equipment. I barely know. But Amani will tell you all the equipment you know.
Right.
You know.
But I do urge you, if you can't, go back and watch our first episode 2 years ago and watch now. And Mandy has come a significant way. And she talks to the guests, oh, get this and do that. I'm just like, look at you. So we're learning on the fly.
Build in public.
Done is better than perfect. That's the theme. Right. Done is better than perfect.
That is so true. That is so true. And then what he just said about videoing it, that's the beauty of podcasting. You film it once, or you record it once, and then you repurpose it over and over and over again in the form of clips, in the form of quotes. It is the cheapest form of marketing you could have. And then you repurpose it, and then it lives there forever. So the next part is the scheduling, the interview prep, the promotion, and the follow-up. So, guests are everywhere. We have 2 prior guests in our room right here. We have Nicole Christie, who's going to be up here in a little bit. We have Hildy Isaacs, who was a guest. One of you may be a future guest, but guests are everywhere. Our style of guests is we want to interview founders and CEOs in multiple industries. And we also want to interview thought leaders in the meetings industry. So once you determine the type of guests that you want, then you schedule the guests. We use Calendly, a Calendly link, and we give the link to the guest, and then they pick their time, and we just block out every Monday at 1:00, and they schedule it. Interview prep. If someone's going to spend an hour of time with you, you want to give them, honor their time and their talent and prep. You don't have to do a ton of prep, but you don't want to ask boring questions. You want to ask specific questions relating to them. I like to use LinkedIn. And another tip, I like to go into the LinkedIn where people recommend them or they recommend somebody, because the things that are most important to that guest, you will see a trend. They will say somebody has a hard worker like 6 times. Hard work's important to them. They might say somebody is very creative. Read those recommendations in LinkedIn. And that's also just a good tip for how you're interacting with potential customers or potential attendees. Yes. And then follow up. So immediately after the podcast, that's when you want to repurpose it. You want to post it. You want to ask your guests to post and share as well. And you want to give them the tools for that, which is maybe you have a hashtag you want them to use. Maybe you want to make sure that you tag them on Instagram as a collaborator, as Corbin recently taught me. So, so there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen from the pre-show and the post-show. Again, it's not a lot. We use Google Docs and we just share with each other. It's really simple. Quick lesson. Let's just go to lessons learned. Okay. I'll tell you a story about Candace later on. It's fun.
Yes, but I have a question for you, because you talked about how we're at 1:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, but some of our guests were on the East Coast. Some of them were Central Time Zone. Do you remember the guest and who we interviewed from the furthest away? Do you remember that?
Australia.
Yes. So there are no limits. I think it was 6 a.m. in Australia for our time. We interviewed her. It was an amazing interview, Pauline Nguyen. And so don't let time zones limit you. It can be anywhere. It's very effective. Lessons learned. Now we are go ahead.
I was going to say, we have Scott Auden of Auden Hospitality, and he's in the UK. We interview him on Monday.
Yes, I did. So, like 9:00 there.
Yeah. We're not afraid of time zones.
We're going to cover lessons learned as we go through it, but we want to share with you 3 ways and kind of with where you can host a podcast and why. At a conference, this is a picture of me at WEC when we were in Cancun, and I did the pre-show for MPI, and conferences. You can do you podcast at a conference. If you think of it this way, like say you're at a conference and you want to activate your booth or whatever, you could interview people there, record it, then you can release like maybe an 8 or a 10 episode podcast, like a season. Then you're done with it for half a year, come back and do another one. So you could do it in a trade show. It's very effective. It draws people's attention. You can set up a nice booth.
It's a lot better than stale French fries and sliders. If you want to draw people to a trade show booth,
Yes.
invite your targets and say, hey, can I grab your opinion for 20 minutes on the microphone? Who's going to say no to that? People love talking about themselves. It's a great pull to the trade show booth. And not only is it a pull to invite your targets as you're chatting with them, but the lights and camera and action surrounding it is also a draw. As we did this last year in the ballroom foyer for WeCon. And an unintended consequence was, Amani, people were taking so many pictures of us and we didn't know it. So it adds to the engagement of your conference as well.
Yes. So like man, you mentioned last year we were in the common area for that. You've seen how we also promote registration. We do that for WeCon. We do it very effectively. So if you're planning a conference and you want to just activate your registration and get people excited, get some of the executives, sponsors, maybe some of your keynote speakers, when you book them, get them to come to an early, a pre-show and drum up excitement. It worked. People remember it. It also carries a through line because people are like, oh, I saw you on the show. I saw you on the podcast before. It really helps people, makes you feel more like kind of at home and connected to the show and to the event too.
Yeah, and I love this one. This is Stacy from Universal Studios. We had so much fun with her last year. She was a sponsor. We interviewed her. We got to show a Mario Kart video that we live streamed to all the different platforms. Yeah. But this was a great way to give a sponsor more visibility than they might not have already had. And she was delightful. She was a great guest.
And then the sponsor will take the video, chop it up and say, look what we did. Here we were at this conference, and just it keeps going and keeps growing.
And then promote registration, just like we talked about at the beginning. And honestly, we don't care if you listen to a podcast, if you create your own podcast, if you share a podcast. We don't care which method you do. But when you leave today, make a decision of one little thing you're going to apply to your newfound podcast world, because it is a space that you've got to be a part of. It is a space that's not going anywhere. I mean, SmartList. Does anybody here listen to SmartList podcast with? Yes, right? That's such a great podcast. That was just bought by Sirius XM for multi-million dollars. Like, this is not going anywhere, and it just keeps jumping every year. So again, we're not up here trying to sell you into like, use us for your podcast or like, come on our show or listen to our show. But you could do all those things if you want. But we're here to tell you, dip your toe into the water of this industry, because it's growing rapidly, and your business and your conferences will benefit if you participate. So this concludes the educational part of the session. And now, oh yeah.
Well, yes.
We're not done. We're not done, Carlos. And now we're going to head into the live interviews. So are you ready to do some live interviews?
All right.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead. You can introduce.
I'm going to introduce
Yes.
her? Okay, our first guest is the founder and CEO of Trula Productions. She is a 10-year Microsoft veteran, and she is the founder and host of Here For Me podcast. Also, she is a speaker today on resilience at 3:15 in the room right around the corner. So please help us welcome to the stage, Nicole Christie.
Nicole Christie, yes. Come on up. So as we're doing that, I'll check with Cora, make sure everything's going well. We're going to hop on the comments. So you can leave comments. And now we go back to like our location 2.
We good? You good?
I'm good.
You good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
First question for Nicole.
First question. Well, should we tell them a little something about what we learned about this seating arrangement?
I forget, but go ahead. Tell them what we learned.
In the past, when we've interviewed people live, we put the guest in the middle because we want them to feel comfortable. And the poor guest was like, ouch, my neck, out. And they were going back and forth like a tennis match. And so we learned it's better for us to put the guest on the end.
Yes.
So we can interact with the guest this way. But Amani needs to be near the computer, because what he's doing on the computer right now is he's watching the chat and he's responding to the chat.
Like I would respond to Veronica. Thank you for putting your comment there. Happy Global Meetings Industry Day, everyone. I'm glad. Happy Global Meetings Industry Day. Yes. So keep adding comments, questions, because now I can monitor chat. I'm listening so I can ask my good questions, and we're off and running.
We're off and running.
We're off and running. Let's go.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with a question right out of the gate.
Okay.
So many years ago, when you were at Microsoft, you were tapped to help make Microsoft better because they were having an issue with senior management and junior management and cultivating that relationship. So they tapped you to start a podcast to improve internal management relationships.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and what resulted from that?
Yeah. So it was Microsoft was rehauling the role of the manager entirely. And it was an initiative called Manager Reimagined. And they launched some new manager expectations, which are model coaching care. It's all public information for everybody. And it was essentially asking managers to step up in a different way. So we knew that the company had transformed, been through a huge transformation over the last, at that time, it was 5 years. This was 2019. And this huge training was launched. So every manager in a company of then 180,000 people had to do 42 hours of training about how to manage. And so many of them were mad, especially the senior ones are like, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've been at Microsoft forever. So that initiative launched. And as part of that, we were trying to figure out a way to facilitate conversations, which is where the podcast idea came from. So how can we give particularly more junior managers a chance to interact with more senior leadership, people that you maybe wouldn't interact with, like the 16 people at Microsoft that report to Satya Nadella, the CEO, and also globally and different departments. Engineering doesn't always talk to HR, finance isn't always talking to marketing. So we wanted to bridge that gap through conversation. And that was where the idea for what is called Managers One-on-One came into play of, okay, let's start this podcast and have conversations with particularly the senior leadership and talk to them about their manager journey. Because even the most senior leaders went through this training, sometimes much to their chagrin. And they shared, well, this is how, I started and this is where I've grown and this is how I model coach and care. And we ended up launching that in February of 2020. Not knowing that a month later, it would never have been as important to have a podcast available because no one was having these trainings in person. So they couldn't go, hey, can I pull you aside as everybody's doing at this conference and talk to you in between sessions about how you do this or what are some of the challenges you have? So that brought the learning to life for everybody at a time. It was just very fortuitous for us, but at a time that they really needed it.
Nice. So my question for Nicole is for your current podcast, how has that benefited you personally and professionally?
Personally, so my podcast here for me is about the power of choosing yourself and how the best self-care comes from the inside. And I talk to people who have walked through fire, which is my session at 2:15 after this, and come out the other side realizing they haven't showed up for themselves in their lives. So personally, it's benefited me to have these conversations because you understand that everyone's fighting a hard battle. You hear that quote, I think it's E. E. Cummings. And so to just go, oh my gosh, everyone's going through a hard time. And also we can share lessons with each other like you guys just did, but that's benefited me a lot, either reinforcing things I've learned or new lessons. And then also just like you were talking about the network piece of it.
Yes.
I have invited so many people on the podcast that I've followed their work for years and wanted to know. And now they're like friends. I mean, this is like,
we're walking partners now.
We're walking partners in San Diego.
Show, now we're walking partners and she's speaking at WeCon.
This is exactly the kind of thing that really happens. And, you add these people to your network and yeah, I mean, it's like a friend matchmaking service is sometimes what I refer to it. So, and then just professionally, the skills that I have built is just like you were talking about, just equipment and learning to communicate in this way has been incredible. And I work with organizations and brands and notable individuals to also build their own podcasts or be guests on podcasts. Like, how do you have messaging that's consistent and universal and resonant? And I help people develop that. So doing it myself is like walking the talk.
Yes.
Okay. So last question.
Yeah.
For those of you, so who out here is considering creating their own podcast eventually or has thought about it? Yeah. It tickled the brain a little bit.
Good.
So for the people out there thinking about creating their own podcast, what is one quick tip you give them to get started?
I think the most important thing is to think of it as you two do. It's a storytelling vehicle. So how are you using a podcast to tell a story and drive a human emotional connection? I remember when we were creating Managers One-on-One, they were like, well, maybe we'll just read the newsletters. I was like, don't read anything. That's not what people need. They want to hear conversation really raw in people's voices. So think about, is that the right vehicle to bring a story to life, a conversation, and make it really human and as emotional as you can? Because we know, I was in corporate communications and marketing at Microsoft. People, you said it, they connect to the people, not the brand.
Right.
So whatever you can do to facilitate an emotional connection through whatever your podcast is going to be a key to success.
All right.
Thank you. We've
Yes.
got to get you to your session.
Yes,
I know.
yes.
So thank you.
Round of applause.
2:15 in Bay Laurel 3 and 4.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I
So
don't know,
round of
it's like a half
applause
an
for
hour.
Nicole
Yeah.
Christie. Yes.
Yes.
And we'll see you in your session.
Thank you for being
All right.
here, Nicole.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Appreciate you.
So while we welcome our next guest, go ahead, Mandy.
Give it up for Nicole Christie.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. A couple questions. So Hildy, thank you for asking the question. Do we ever do a podcast standing up? We haven't done that yet. That could be on the drink. And then and I hope I say your first name right. Tarina, right? Did I say it right? Okay. That's the other thing. Names can be very confusing. You ask, how do we approach scripting and planning an episode? So for our podcast, we generally will do introduction. We'll talk back and forth, catch up on our weekends. Then we will.
Well, I want us to talk more at the beginning, and Amani's all business.
Yeah,
He
let's
gets
get
straight
to the
I'm like,
interview.
Amani, we got to chat more at the beginning.
Yes. And then we have our interview where we talk. We have one special segment that's kind of our differentiating factor. We will allow the guest to ask us each a question, and then we kind of bring it home with a final question there. And that's the only scripting we do. We let our research really kind of guide the conversation, and we do really phenomenal research. One of my mentors is Debbie Millman. She has a podcast called Design Matters, which is phenomenal. It's been around for like 21 years. She does great research, so I try to follow the example she sets, and we just let that guide our conversation.
Yeah. And one thing about scripting is I have been on hundreds of podcasts as a guest, and those podcasts that send me the questions in advance, I hate it because you're just memorizing answers and talking points. And that is not an organic, authentic conversation. That is somebody asking you a question, then you repeating the answer like a robot, and then somebody on the other side asking a question. That doesn't build a deep relationship. So we are really big on, we don't give questions in advance. The Wednesday before the show goes out, we send an email to our guests and we let them know the format of the show. We let them know at 20 minutes before the show is over, we'll flip the script and you can ask us a question, and then we'll ask you how we can support you. So we let them know how it's going to go, but we don't let them know questions because we really want to have that authentic conversation. So does that answer the question, Hildy?
Yes. That wasn't Hildy. That was Tarina.
Oh, yes, Tarina. Yes. Does that answer the question? Tarina has a podcast too, everybody. Tarina, tell everybody what your podcast name is. Yes.
Okay. So
check
for
it out.
For the people watching online, she said Fearfully and Wonderfully Gray. So check that out. Subscribe, listen, promote, rate. And now, who's our next guest?
Our next guest, we love this person. So she's the CEO of Laguna Beach DMO, and she had her own podcast with her previous DMO. She's a documentarian. She's respected and loved in our industry. Rachel O'Neill Kuzi.
Yes. Round of applause. Welcome. Bring water. Good. So I'm going to start with asking the first question for you.
All right, let's hear it.
How did doing a podcast benefit your work with your DMO?
So I've had 2 different podcasts. So the one that I had in Dana Point was an interview style. And I loved that podcast because it really made me get in deep with my community. I got to hear their stories, why they started their businesses, why Dana Point was so important to them. And then my podcast with Laguna Beach,
Yes.
It's called From Radical Origins. Please go listen. It's amazing. Totally different. We went back in history. We found people, we interviewed them, and we made it more of a storytelling podcast. They both benefited the destinations because it was a human connection.
Yes.
And it was telling a story that was important for the community. And the beauty of a podcast is it lives forever.
Yes.
So no matter what happens, somebody down the road is going to be able to listen to that. It's evergreen, and people get to have that.
Yeah.
What's unexpected results of both of the podcasts or one of the podcasts? Something that happened that you're like, that's awesome. I'm so glad that happened, but I certainly didn't plan for that.
So it's kind of cool. Like this storytelling one that I'm doing in Laguna Beach right now. I had these two people that I had interviewed for the same podcast at different times, and they met each other when we did the documentary. I follow everybody on Instagram. All of a sudden, I see them having cocktails in Moya's backyard. And so I comment and I said, "Oh my gosh, I love to see the two of you together." And they said, "Well, we wouldn't have met if it wasn't for you." And so I thought that was really cool that people that live in the same community are being brought together by this project.
I love that. And I think that's an important point you make about building community, because podcasts do build community. Hildy and I are here because we were also interviewed on a different podcast. The first time we met was in real life was yesterday, but we've been on a weekly audio podcast together once a week for the last 3 years. So, and that's a community, a real cool community. So you're right.
And I saw that
You did.
on your Instagram.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's cool.
But the community aspect of it is so powerful. I'm so glad you said that.
Thank you.
Now, if we're going to go back to, I love asking this question. I ask it in many different forms, but before you even started your first podcast and give your younger podcasting self advice based on all the lessons you've learned, what advice would you share? Because that can help many of the people in the audience who are thinking about, do I start one? Do I not? What do you say?
Preparation is key. So with the interview style podcast that I didn't always prepare enough in advance with the people that I was interviewing. And there was certain times that I was scrambling. And luckily I had a lot of people in the community that I loved that I was able to call and be like, I'm interviewing you in 5 minutes. I'm showing up at your place of business. Be ready. But I wish that I would have locked in maybe a backup for the backup for the backup.
That's good. Yeah, because we have the same thing with the backup for the backup for the backup.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
What are some podcasts that you listen to? Because not everybody here is going to start their own podcast. They may have never listened to one before. So what podcast do we get them started with?
Well, to start, obviously listen to From Radical Origins. But then after that, Smartless, I am like absolutely obsessed with it. It is so funny. They have the best guests on. I love their banter. And the cool thing is that a lot of podcasts that you see today have a video component.
Yeah.
And Smartless, they are so like, we are not doing a video component. We want to be storytellers, and we want you to listen. And they're great at it.
I love that podcast.
It's so good.
Smartless. So funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Any
I mean, we could ask questions for days, but I think, this is a good pause right here.
I have one quick final question.
Okay.
So what you may not know is Rachel has crippling stage fright.
Yes.
Now you may not know that because she did such a great job, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So what advice do you have for people out there that think, I can't get on a stage, I can't speak on a microphone, I can't get on a podcast? What advice do you have?
I would say to do it with people that make you feel comfortable the first time around. And it feels better seated, actually. So if you have the opportunity and you're in a seat, it probably doesn't feel as terrible.
Just carry a chair around with you.
Carry a chair around. And I know it's shocking because there's a few of you in this room that has watched me karaoke. That's different, Ozzy.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thanks
You're
for
welcome.
taking time. Everybody.
Round of applause. Yes.
Rachel
Yes.
O'Neal Kuzi. Thank you. Thank you.
So funny story, because she talked about how it lives forever. I did a podcast with a camp that I volunteer for. It's camp spinoff, kids that are DJing, want to learn how to DJ. And just this past January, someone graduated from like college, and they used the episode we did 5 years ago as part of their final class presentation for graduating. And they talked about how much they've grown since that specific episode. So it lives forever, good and bad. Yes.
Good and bad. Yeah. Yeah. Like when Amani says, if you go back to our very first podcast we did in person, we had a test guest and it was somebody higher up from Visa.
Yes.
And we aired the test guests. We didn't do a private rehearsal. We aired it because we're like, we're building a public. Let's just see. And it went really well. But
Yeah.
what I didn't tell Amani was it was my brother-in-law. And because I didn't want him to have any preconceived notions about it, I wanted him to do, he would normally prepare the way you
Of
prepared.
course.
But I wanted it to be as professional as possible. But if you go back and look at that interview versus what we've got now, it's so much better. You do just keep getting better with each one. So, should we bring in our final guest?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is going to be different because this person doesn't have a podcast that we know of or yet. Or we don't know if she listens to podcasts or not. We'll find out. But we wanted to bring her up because she is a thought leader in our industry. She is a very revered meeting planner, and she's been on both sides of the industry. And we wanted you to get a feel for what is it like just to interview somebody where we're not talking about podcasts, just to interview a regular guest. So please welcome to the stage, Brandy Thigpen, Vice President of Events and Marketing with City National Bank. Hello, Brandy.
Hello.
Oh,
Thanks for
thank you
being
for
here.
having me.
It's our pleasure.
You're on.
Yes, we'll make sure you're on there. Remember, after this, we have Q&A, so get your questions ready for
Testing.
that. Yes,
Yeah, there we go.
okay.
Good. You're in.
So, well, are we allowed to ask questions about a podcast or not? Because I have a
Yes,
question.
whatever we
We can ask
want.
what we want.
Yeah.
When you're planning events, now that you've kind of learned some more about podcasts and kind of how it works, have you seen any ways where it could fit or even make your event even more memorable?
Podcast, making my events more memorable. I do a lot of events that are education focused. So I imagine there's some financial education, some wealth management podcasts out there. I haven't used them, but perhaps that's something new that we can integrate in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question because a lot of people ask. Somebody asked us a couple years ago can you take us from the screen, like behind the screen to the stage? And we're like, I guess we had never done it before. So we're still getting our sea legs
Right.
and learning on that too. So thank you for that. I have a non-podcast related question. So you have such a spectacular pedigree of like whether it's Special Olympics or whether it's the LA Tourism Board or whether it's City National Bank or all the volunteer stuff that you do. What is one common thread for you that sticks out in your mind, whether it's something that you learned early on that you continue to do, or what is the common thread for you that you apply towards your daily work world?
So when I go work with vendors or venue or something that is so important to me is that I'm your partner just as much as you're my partner, and I want to be a good partner. So I ask one of the first questions I ask is, "What is your biggest headache with meeting planners? What is something when you work with a group that is a continuous problem? I don't want to create that problem for you." And that one question creates a partnership on a positive note from the very beginning of the planning.
That's awesome. We need more planners like you, right?
Yes. You could clap for that for sure. Yeah.
Clap for that one. That's
Thank
great.
you.
In celebration of Global Meetings Industry Day, what's your perspective on the industry where we are today and what excites you about our future?
Oh, there's so much, and I talk about this a lot. Mandy's heard this several times, but service is so important, and we've seen it change a lot. And I think some of that is post COVID. I don't know if it's generational. I don't know if it's that we're not preparing our folks, coming into the industry. But I think just moving forward. Keeping that in mind as we are training. And I used to work with a company that had a training program that you train your replacement. And now when I'm working with people, if you've got in your role, if you're training someone to come in so that when you move on to your next role, you have someone that can step in, it's helpful. It saves the company money. It's easier to transition. But just setting everyone up for success with that level of service that we need. And I think we can do better of that in the future. And I think there's a big eye on that right now.
That's true. I agree. 100%. Okay, I'm going to switch gears for a minute. I'm not going back to the Wayback Machine. Amani always jokes that I like to go back to the Wayback Machine. We're not going there.
Okay.
Working parents. How many working parents do we have in the audience? Right? Like the majority of the audience, hands up to working parents.
Yes.
You're a working parent.
I am.
And we have a demanding schedule and we're traveling. And then when you're not traveling, it's still demanding at home. So, what rituals or routines do you have as a working parent that kind of keeps the ship as righted as possible?
Fortunately, we're in a fun industry. We're not in, I'm not a surgeon, anything like that. I'm in an industry where I can incorporate my son into my work. If I need to do a site visit at Universal Studios, we might do that on a Saturday afternoon and my son might get to come along and we, go to the park if I need to go experience a hotel, I like to go to hotels and not tell them who I am and check in and stay and see what the experience is like. If I tell you that I'm coming to do a site, you may put me in the system as a VIP and you may treat me like a VIP. I don't want to know how you're going to treat your VIPs. I want to know how you're going to treat your guest, period. So I take my son on a lot of those visits. I do in this industry, of course, just exploring the city is work for me. I can take him along, with adventures like that. He's become a little high maintenance. Um, but I block my calendar in the mornings for time for him to get ready for school. And then I give myself 30 minutes after school drop off time. I don't schedule meetings immediately right after school drop off. That gives him the time that he needs that I can focus on him to get him to school in the morning. And then I don't have to rush him out of the door, get out of the car so that I can get back. I have a meeting. When I pick him up from school in the afternoons, same thing. I have that block of time so that we can get home. I can make him a snack. I have the time to sit down and, listen to how his day was. So I think it's important where I block my calendar to give him the attention that he needs as well.
So, prioritization and time blocking. I love that.
Yes. Round of applause. Yes, yes.
It's good.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
So our final question for you. When I teach, the majority of my students, they want to be like event planners. If you were in front of, say, students that are getting ready to graduate in 1 month, what advice would you give them as they're getting ready to potentially enter into our industry?
Use your network. Your network to me is my greatest tool in my tool belt. Mandy is someone who inspired me probably 12, 13 years ago. I was still early on in my career. I just moved to LA and I saw her speak and I thought, wow, I want to be like her when I grow up.
Yes.
Mandy and I just met in person for the first time 3 or 4 months ago. And now to be here with you and share the stage with you too is so special to me. Thank you. But your network, I've used my network to not only get other roles for myself, I've used my network to help people within my network get their next role. I've used my network to help you get if you've got a role to fill, and we're all here together. And I use my network to, hire my vendors and my suppliers and providers. And so start that network early. LinkedIn is very important to me. And I always tell folks, you never know who's standing in line in front of you at McDonald's. And so just the way you treat people and the way you speak to people, it's important. So
I love that. And just a quick story about Brandy is we met for the first time in January. I was mesmerized. Another girl crush. I was mesmerized because she was on stage at State of the Industry and she said like everything I had been thinking about our industry. And then I invited her to be a guest speaker for the class that I teach. I teach site and selection and contract negotiation. I invited her to be a guest speaker, and this woman told everybody in the class, like, email me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. And so not only is she telling you to build your network, but she is lifting up students and helping them build their network and really, really just, walking the walk. So I appreciate you for that. And
Thank you.
It's a really awesome thing to see.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Round of applause
Absolutely.
for Brandy
Thank
right
you.
here.
Being here, Brandy.
Awesome. Yes.
We appreciate you.
All right, so now we're gonna get up and stand. We'll stand up because now we're to the Q&A portion of the program.
Yeah, so just a little behind the scenes thing.
Yes.
These are the only notes I had. Like Amani had no notes, I
No
don't think.
notes. Yeah.
These are the only notes. So I just wrote down 2 or 3 questions for each person, and I did write these down in advance. But there are times when we are doing our podcast that we're not writing anything down in advance. We're just doing the research and remembering it. But you really only need a couple questions because then you just saw the conversation does flow pretty well. So
Questions. Okay, so Carlos, you say your question. I'm going to repeat it so our online audience can hear you also. Ready?
thank
Thank
you.
One at a time.
All of your podcasts. What time of day do you think the podcasts are the best for you? And that's it.
Okay, platform. So for free, Zoom. Just record on Zoom. It's really easy, simple. People are comfortable with it. Do that. If you want to spend a little money, you can use StreamYard. StreamYard will allow you to record and broadcast it at the same time to Facebook, YouTube, everything, Twitch, all the above.
And StreamYard is compatible. If you want to do a LinkedIn Live, StreamYard is the preferred platform for LinkedIn Live. So if you do a LinkedIn Live, it's super easy and they will walk you through how to do your own LinkedIn Live using StreamYard. It is a very easy thing to do. Yeah.
Yes. And then you do not need a Corbin. We have a Corbin here today because we have these 3 cameras. We have a lot of sound going in here. We have different things. We're switching scenes and everything. Remember, we're 2 years in. That's like, so you can get there eventually. You do not need a Corbin. You can do it yourself.
And yeah, good job, Corbin.
Yes,
Let's give it up. And a quick fun fact about Corbin. For 2 years, so for 3 years, Corbin was my speech editor. So I would send him recorded speeches. He would edit the clips and would send everything out to anybody who's hiring me as a speaker. So when we started the show, we need somebody to edit the clips.
Yes.
So he edited our clips. Well, Corbin is growing his business. So he's moving on to event production, like live events, like what we're doing here. So we're in a couple weeks or so, we're no longer going to have him do our video clips or have somebody else do it. But Corbin is going to still be with us for all of these live events we do. So I say that twofold. One, how it looks when you first start isn't how it's going to always be. And you hope that people grow and evolve and stuff with you. But number two, if you're looking for somebody to help you with a live event, Corbin obviously knows what he's doing. So go see him after.
Yes. Did we answer all the questions for you? Oh. I would say because podcasts are recorded and people can listen when they're walking, driving, commuting, it doesn't really matter. Which works best for you and what can you be consistent with? If you're going to be live and you're going to go live consistently, we're consistent Mondays, 1 p.m. Pacific, every week for the most part. So that's if you want to go live. If you just want to record your podcast and then distribute it, what works best for you? Fit it around your schedule.
Yeah, and most podcasts are not live. That's our differentiator is that we are live. Most podcasts are recorded and they're released whenever you want to release them. But when you release it either on the same day every week, on the same day every month. Be consistent because that consistency and frequency is important. So we are live every Monday at 1, but we also record a mini podcast. And that was our way of getting to our 100 episode mark. So we record a quick 10-minute mini episode that's just Amani and I kind of kibitzing about a particular topic. And that was our way of getting more visibility. And that's recorded and we release that every Wednesday on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So whatever you decide to do, just have some frequency and consistency about it.
Yeah. I wouldn't maybe start off doing a podcast live. It's just that I have experience and I wanted to push Mandy to be outside her comfort zone and it worked. So that's why we did it this way.
It worked, but I'm still not sold on live.
Yes.
But
that's true. It's a conversation we have.
That's just between you and me in the wall.
Oh. What other questions do we have? No. Okay. Yes. Great. Okay, so frequency was a question. How frequent should you release an episode? So this was a debate we had in the beginning. First, Mandy wanted to do it once a month.
Well, you wanted to do it once a week, and I said that gives me heartburn.
Yes. So we started doing it bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. Now we're up to every week. I think the best frequency would be if you can do it every week and take off holidays and things, that could be good. You can record 4 or 5 at the start and just kind of ease your way into doing it that way. Or you could do seasons, like they have TV seasons. Like you do a season spring, summer, fall, take off the winter. As long as you communicate with your audience, I believe seasons could be effective. Now, if you really want to push it and do it weekly, once a week, that will allow you to get up to the 100 episode mark, which is kind of a landmark. Fun fact though, most podcasts don't last past episode 7. Keep that in mind. Most people start and stop by 7 episodes.
And then by 25 episodes is when you start growing your audience and you start having loyal fans, so to speak, where people are coming up to you. And so there's different landmarks that happen and it doesn't take that many. But yeah, I would, and again, I don't want to overwhelm you. When we first started and they said weekly, I choked. I'm like, I don't have time for that. So just start slow.
Yes.
Get your sea legs. If it works for you to do once a month, do once a month. I guarantee if you start once a month, eventually you will be once a week, but just start once a month for now.
And how often do we do ours now?
We do once a week. You win. What
So
if your
yes.
therapist teach me? You're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. No,
Yes.
no, you win. You win. But yeah, now we're once a week, and
Yeah.
it's great. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
So great question. We answered that. What other questions do we have? Anything else? We covered everything.
Anything else?
Go ahead.
Join me, talk to me, whatever, like, hi. And I think I got started because I'd say 7 or 8 years ago, they were talking to Adam Carolla, and he had a really popular podcast.
Yes. Right.
When you started, how did you constantly grow yourself so that when it started, you got to that level where you're like, I don't care if someone's listening right now, we're just going to keep talking.
Right.
I mean, I think the podcast is for you to begin with. I don't think it's to be famous. I think it's for you. I think it's that masterclass, it's that networking, and it's really a very intimate conversation between you and the guest. So if nobody else listens, it doesn't matter. It's you and the guest. Other people might listen, which is awesome, and then it will grow with frequency. But you don't have to be a celebrity. You don't have to be famous. You just have to do it for yourself. Whatever that intention is, determine that intention and do it for yourself.
Yes. So I would agree. And just it's like marketing for your business or your brand, your personal brand. So it's really more about you. And when people find you, you're going to be famous to them. So keep that in mind. Yes.
True. Yeah, we have people coming up to us all the time like, "Oh, I just listened to the show and this really resonated with me." And that makes us charge on another week and another week, and it helps us curate our guests a little differently too cuz we've learned certain guests are really popular, guests that we wouldn't expect are popular either. So, you kind of want to pay attention what people are saying as well.
So we have a couple of free giveaways for you. We're going to give you the deck for here. Also going to send you a link where you can get all the equipment that you need. We just asked that this is one of the fun surveys we do, so you can kind of take the QR code, fill out the survey here. It asks you about 5 questions, and you can do that. Just for final advice or whatever, I would say first listen to some podcasts and then just kind of just try it out. Try it out one time, once a week, once a month, and see how you like it. You can grow. It's great marketing, and I think it's going to continue to get more popular.
Yeah. And my final advice is if you do decide to do it, it doesn't have to be perfect. Have fun with it, experiment with it, and just know that this is an industry that is growing rapidly. And it's way more important to be a part of it than to be that person that you're like, I wish I would have listened to a podcast. I wish I would have started my podcast. I wish I would have promoted a podcast. You don't want to be left behind because this is growing rapidly. So just dip your toe in the water and figure it out after today. And come to us. Ask us any questions you want. I don't know if we do we have a slide?
Oh yeah, we have a slide, and we're going to share our favorite podcast too. So I love Jay Shetty show. I love him. Design Matters. Lewis Howes. Also, as a music fan, I love R&B Money. Now keep in mind they curse a lot on that one, so just earmuffs if their kids around and stuff. They curse, but they have great interviews. What about you?
Mine is Pivot. Pivot with Scott Galloway, Prof G, Armchair Expert, and Smartlist. Those are my favorite podcasts too.
Yes.
So come see us.
Yes.
Ask us questions. If you need coaching on how to start a podcast, Amani can help you. If you want to do a podcast at a trade show or an event, let us know. If you have any questions at all or anything, or maybe you have a future guest for us, come visit us and let us know. And thank you so much for being an awesome audience today. We really appreciate it.
Yes, round of applause. Thank you. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Those are our QR codes. And we just appreciate you being in this session, being attentive, asking good questions. And I'm going to walk over here and stop the live stream. That's kind of the final step. And then we're done. But just thanks again to our guests who came on stage with us. And I'm glad to see everyone here at WeCon. So awesome.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Take care.